Have you ever wondered how someone can simply disappear, and no one seems to notice? A young woman, a life that once held promise, and then silence. No name, no family stepping forward, no answers. Only questions. On February 19, 1971, two teenagers were hitchhiking along Interstate 75 in Central Florida. As they crossed a bridge over Lake Panasoffkee, their eyes caught something in the shallow water below. At first, it might have looked like debris caught in the weeds. But as they got closer, the horrifying truth became clear. It was the body of a young woman. Authorities rushed to the scene, and quickly, the mystery began. She was estimated to be between 17 and 24 years old. She was dressed neatly, wearing jewelry, a poncho, and plaid pants. And yet, there was no purse, no identification, nothing to tell police who she was. Around her neck was a man's belt, size 36. That belt had been used to strangle her. Reporters later gave her a haunting nickname, Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee. It was a name meant to keep her memory alive, but it also underscored the tragedy. More than 5 decades later, we still don't know her true name. We don't know who she was, where she came from, or why her life ended so violently that winter day. And that's where our story begins. This case has puzzled investigators, journalists, and everyday people for over 50 years. The Sumter County Sheriff's Office has never closed it. It was featured on Unsolved Mysteries back in 1992, reigniting public interest. Decades later, new forensic science, like isotope testing, offered fresh clues, pointing far beyond Florida, maybe even across the Atlantic. Yet still, the answers remain out of reach. Some theories sound convincing. Others drift into speculation. For example, in 2012, a Greek television program suggested she might have been a girl named Constantina, though that connection has never been proven. We'll be clear in this story about what is fact and what remains unverified. But let's pause for a moment. Picture this. A young woman traveling, perhaps with hopes and dreams, maybe with secrets she carried close. How does a person like that vanish into history without a single loved one searching for her? How can someone's entire identity be erased, until all that's left is a nickname tied to the lake where she was found? That is the chilling question that has kept this case alive for half a century. Today, we're exploring Cold Case Files, Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee. Together, we'll retrace the investigation, the discoveries, the theories, and the haunting silence that still surrounds her. So let's begin with what we know about the young woman herself. To understand this mystery, we need to step back. Let's go to Florida in 1971. Lake Panasoffkee sits in Sumter County, right in the center of the state. Back then, it was a quiet rural community. The interstate, Highway 75, had only recently opened, connecting Florida to Georgia and all the way north. It became a busy corridor for travelers, truckers, and drifters. But off the road, life slowed down. Families fished the lake. Retirees bought modest homes in small neighborhoods. It was the kind of place where strangers stood out, and everyone knew who belonged. And yet, on that February day, a stranger's body was discovered beneath the bridge. Investigators determined she was a young woman, somewhere between 17 and 24 years old. She stood between 5 feet and 5'5", weighing around 110 to 120 pounds. Her hair was a deep brown, and her eyes, though decomposition made it difficult to be sure, were likely brown as well. She was not dressed like someone in distress or poverty. She wore a green poncho, a blue blouse, and plaid pants in shades of blue and green. On her hand was a simple gold ring. Around her neck, a fine chain necklace. On her wrist, a Baylor brand watch, a detail that suggested someone once cared enough to give her something nice. These details matter, because even when we don't know her name, we can picture her. She wasn't anonymous when she was alive. She had style. She had possessions. She had a story. And then came the medical findings. Clues that told investigators more about her past. Her right ankle had once been broken, and surgeons had repaired it using a very specific method, known as the Watson-Jones technique. That procedure was relatively new at the time, most often performed between 1967 and 1970. Whoever she was, she had received medical care that required skill and expense. There was more. Dental examination revealed porcelain crowns. Another sign she had access to dentistry beyond the basics. And perhaps the most haunting discovery of all, evidence that she had given birth at least once. This wasn't just a young woman traveling alone. She may have been a mother, Somewhere, possibly, a child was left behind. Now imagine this for a moment. A woman with surgical scars, with dental work, with jewelry on her hands, and the history of motherhood in her body. And yet, no one came forward. No missing persons report matched her. No family called the sheriff's office. It was as if she had been erased from memory the instant she disappeared. For the community around Lake Panasoffkee, this was shocking. A rural town like Sumter County wasn't used to mysteries of this scale. Crime happened, yes, but not this. A nameless young woman pulled from the water, carrying so many unanswered questions. People began asking, how could someone with so many identifying features go unnoticed? How could a mother vanish and not be missed? And that question still lingers. When we hear about cases like this, it's easy to get lost in the cold facts, the age ranges, the height, the clothing. But behind every measurement, there was a person. A woman who walked, laughed, spoke, and lived a life we'll probably never fully know. Think about the ring on her finger. Was it a gift from a partner? A family heirloom? Or simply a piece of jewelry she bought for herself? Each detail hints at connections, at relationships, at people who might have once cared deeply for her. But if they cared, why did no one report her missing? Why has no one stepped forward, even after decades of publicity? That is the haunting paradox of this case. She left behind physical evidence that she lived, but no trail of loved ones to anchor her to an identity. And so, Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee remained a Jane Doe. A woman preserved in fragments, clothes, scars, jewelry, without the simple dignity of a name. Her story ended beneath that bridge in 1971. But the investigation into her death was only beginning. Let's look now at what happened the day she was found, and the discoveries that followed. By now, we have a picture of the young woman herself. But what exactly happened when her body was discovered, and what clues did investigators find? Let's walk through the timeline. It was Friday, February 19th, 1971. Two teenage boys, both hitchhiking along Interstate 75, decided to cross the bridge that spanned Lake Panasoffkee. One of them glanced down into the water below. At first, he thought he saw a large bundle of fabric tangled near the roots by the shoreline. But as he looked closer, he realized the terrible truth. It was the body of a young woman. The sheriff's office was immediately called. Deputies made their way down beneath the bridge to recover her. The scene was grim. She had been in the water for anywhere between 2 weeks and a month. The body showed significant decomposition. And yet, some details had survived. Her clothing was still intact. The poncho, the plaid pants, the blouse, the jewelry. Items that gave her the appearance of someone who had once walked into the world fully alive, not expecting this fate. But then came the chilling discovery. Around her neck was a leather belt, a man's belt, size 36. That belt had been pulled tight, used to strangle her. It was still there, even after weeks in the water. The investigators also noticed something else. Her body appeared to be wrapped in a blanket, as if someone had covered her before dumping her over the bridge. That detail suggested intent. It wasn't a random accident. It wasn't a fall. Someone had murdered her, and then tried to conceal her in the lake. No identification was found. No wallet, no purse, no driver's license. Yet strangely, her jewelry was left untouched. A watch, a gold ring, a necklace. Things that could have been taken if robbery were the motive. But they weren't. That choice raised a disturbing question. Was the killer someone who knew her? Someone who didn't care about the items, but only about silencing her? As the autopsy unfolded, more clues emerged. The surgical repair to her ankle, the porcelain dental work, and the revelation that she had given birth at least once in her life. Each fact built a picture of a woman who was not destitute, not invisible. And yet, she was a Jane Doe. Let's pause here. Imagine being one of those deputies in 1971. You have a body with unique scars from surgery, expensive dental work, signs of motherhood. You think surely someone somewhere is going to call and say, "That's my daughter. That's my sister. That's my friend." And yet, no call came. The official estimate placed her time of death roughly 2 to 4 weeks before her body was discovered. That meant late January or early February of 1971. Who was traveling through Florida then? Who vanished during that time? These were the questions investigators were left with. The years passed, and the mystery remained. Then, decades later, new science offered a glimmer of hope. In 2012, her body was exhumed again, and scientists performed isotope analysis on her teeth and bones. This kind of testing can reveal the geographic region where a person grew up, based on the chemical signatures of the water, and food they consumed. The results pointed thousands of miles away, from Central Florida to southeastern Europe. More specifically, they suggested she had likely spent most of her life in Greece, near the area of Lorium. The testing also indicated she had probably been in the United States for less than 2 months before her death. That finding opened an entirely new line of questions. Was she a traveler? A visitor? Perhaps an immigrant who had only just arrived? And if so, who brought her to Florida and why? Even with these scientific breakthroughs, no one came forward with a missing persons report that matched her. To this day, there is no record of a young woman from Greece, or anywhere else, who disappeared in Florida during that time with details matching her description. And so, the case grew colder. What makes this story so unsettling are the gaps. She was not hidden in a remote wilderness. She was found under a bridge, in a lake beside a major interstate. And yet, no witnesses came forward. No driver saw someone stopping at the bridge at night. No one remembered a car pulled over. There were no fingerprints recovered from the belt. No tire tracks preserved near the site. Nothing to give investigators the lead they desperately needed. So we're left with contradictions. A woman who carried evidence of her life, a surgery scar, crowns, jewelry, motherhood, yet no identity. A murder scene in a public place, yet no witnesses. A body discovered near a busy highway, yet no one noticed anything suspicious. It's enough to make you ask, how does that happen? How does someone leave behind so many fragments of a story, and yet not enough to be recognized? This is where the mystery deepens. Because while investigators never stopped looking, the clues they did have only led to more questions. And as years turned into decades, new theories began to emerge. Some seemed plausible. Others were based on speculation, on whispers, or on long-shot connections. And that brings us to the next part of this story, the investigation itself, and the theories that have tried and failed to give Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee her true name. From the very beginning, investigators knew this wasn't going to be easy. The woman found in Lake Panasoffkee had no identification, no fingerprints that could be recovered, and no one in the area who recognized her. Still, the Sumter County Sheriff's Office didn't give up. In the days after her discovery, deputies sent out thousands of flyers across Florida and neighboring states. They included sketches, descriptions of her clothing and jewelry, even details about her surgery. The hope was simple. Someone somewhere would recognize her. But the calls never came. The case sat cold for years. Then in 1986, her body was exhumed for the first time. Investigators believed that advances in forensic science might provide answers. They created a new facial reconstruction, an attempt to give life back to the nameless young woman. This image was circulated widely, but again, no one stepped forward. In 1992, the case finally gained national attention when it was featured on the television program Unsolved Mysteries. Millions of people across the United States saw her story. Some tips came in, but none of them led to a solid identification. If anything, the media exposure created more noise than clarity. And then, in 2012, for decades after her death, her body was exhumed once again. This time, the technology was far more advanced. Scientists led by Dr. George Kamenov at the University of Florida performed isotope analysis on her remains. This kind of testing examines chemical traces locked in bones and teeth, revealing the geography of where a person grew up. The results were stunning. They suggested that Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee had likely spent her childhood and adolescence in Greece, near the coastal mining region of Lorium. Even more surprising, the analysis indicated she had been in the United States for less than a year, possibly just 2 months, before her death in 1971. This new information gave investigators hope, but it also complicated the case. If she was from another country, it might explain why no one in Florida reported her missing. But it also raised new questions. Why had she come to America? Who was she traveling with? And how did her journey end beneath a bridge in Central Florida? From here, theories began to circulate. Let's go through the most notable ones. One theory emerged in Greece in 2012, after the results of the isotope testing were publicized. A popular Greek television program called Phos Sto Townel, which translates to light in the tunnel, featured the case. During the broadcast, a woman called in. She claimed that the facial reconstruction looked strikingly like her former classmate, a girl named Konstantina, who had disappeared decades earlier. For a moment, it felt like the mystery might be solved. The possibility of a real name, Konstantina, gave the case new energy. But when investigators tried to trace Konstantina's family, no relatives could be found. There were no official records to confirm the connection. To this day, the Konstantina theory remains unverified. It's possible that the resemblance was just coincidence. Or perhaps it was a lead that could never quite be proven. Another theory surfaced much earlier, back in 1988. According to one report, a young woman named Carol had run away from Iowa. She had been pregnant, and later was rumored to be traveling with 3 men in the Tampa area around the time of the murder. Some speculated that Carol could have been the victim found in Lake Panasoffkee. But again, the details didn't fully align. There was never any direct evidence tying Carol to the case, and no family confirmation. This too remains unproven. There were also theories tied to cultural events in Florida. Some have suggested that the young woman might have attended the annual Epiphany celebration in Tarpon Springs, a community with deep Greek roots. Every January, young men dive into the water to retrieve a cross, while families gather to celebrate. Could she have traveled there with others from Greece, only to meet a tragic fate afterward? This idea has circulated for years, but again, there's no hard evidence. It remains speculation. The simplest and perhaps most unsettling theory is this: she knew her killer. The belt used to strangle her was a man's size 36, an item that likely belonged to someone familiar to her. She wasn't robbed. Her jewelry was left untouched. This wasn't about theft. It was about control, about silencing someone. Perhaps she trusted the wrong person. Perhaps she was traveling with someone who turned on her. The lack of struggle marks on her body suggests she may not have even realized the danger until it was too late. So why has it been so hard to solve? Part of the answer lies in timing. In 1971, there was no DNA testing. Even fingerprint technology was limited. Dental records could have been useful, but only if a dentist somewhere reported a missing patient, and none ever did. Without a missing persons report to match, investigators were left with nothing to compare her to. By the time DNA science became available, decades had passed. The elements had degraded much of her remains. And while investigators have preserved what they could, they have yet to find a viable DNA match. The challenges go beyond technology. The truth is, some people vanish without anyone looking for them. If she came from another country, her family may not have known how to contact American authorities. They may not even have known she was in Florida. Or perhaps she was estranged from loved ones, and no one felt responsible to report her missing. Through it all, the sheriff's office has continued to work the case. They've never closed the file. Even today, they still receive tips from the public. In recent years, advocates have suggested involving the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit that uses advanced genetic genealogy to identify unknown victims. That process has given names back to many Jane Does across America. As of 2025, there has been no official confirmation that her DNA has been processed through the project. But the hope is still there. And maybe this is where we, as listeners, become part of the story. What do you think? Was she Konstantina, the missing classmate from Greece? Was she Carol, the runaway from Iowa? Or was she someone else entirely, an immigrant, a visitor, or simply a young woman whose story slipped through the cracks of history? What we do know is this. After more than 50 years, Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee still has no name. The facts we have only deepen the mystery. But perhaps one day, with science and with persistence, she'll be given back the identity that was stolen from her. And that leads us to our final part. What this case means, and the lessons we're left with after half a century of unanswered questions. More than 50 years have passed since that February afternoon in 1971, when 2 teenage boys discovered a young woman beneath the bridge at Lake Panasoffkee. And yet, today she remains nameless. No family has come forward. No arrest has ever been made. What we do know is a mosaic of details. She had undergone a rare ankle surgery known as the Watson-Jones procedure. She wore dental crowns that suggested quality care. She had given birth at least once. And thanks to modern isotope testing, we learned she likely grew up near Lorium, Greece, and had been in the United States only a short time before her death. But despite all these clues, the central mystery persists. Who is she, and why did her life end in a Florida lake? Her story highlights the limits of forensic investigation in the 1970s. At that time, DNA was still decades away. Missing persons reports weren't centralized, and immigrant communities often lacked ways to connect with authorities. A young woman could disappear, and her absence might never even reach law enforcement. Today, with advances in science, cases like hers stand a better chance. DNA genealogy has identified hundreds of Jane Does in recent years. And while Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee has not yet been confirmed as part of that effort, many hope that one day her identity will finally be restored. Because that's what this case comes down to, not just solving a murder, but giving back a name. Behind the headlines and theories was a real person. She laughed, she dreamed, she may have traveled halfway across the world with hope in her heart. And then her voice was silenced. So I'll leave you with this. Who do you think Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee was? Was she Constantina, the Greek classmate remembered by a friend? Was she Carol, the runaway whispered about in Florida? Or someone else, whose story has yet to surface? Could DNA finally give her back her name? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your theories, your perspectives, or even just your reflections on how stories like this resonate with you. Thank you for spending this time with me, retracing the footsteps of a mystery that has lasted more than half a century. This has been Cold Case Files, Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee. If you found this episode compelling, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story we uncover together. Because even after 50 years, Little Miss Lake Panasoffkee is still waiting for her truth, for her name, and for her story to finally be complete.